I never thought I would end up installing security cameras because of my neighbor. But here we are in suburban Phoenix, Arizona, where the summer heat makes you question every life decision you have ever made. My name is Trevor Dawson, and I have lived in the Sagebrush Estates community for about 3 years now. The place is nice enough. Decent houses with Spanish tile roofs, Zara-escaped yards to save water, and a community pool that nobody uses because it feels like swimming in bathwater from June through September. What makes this place less than paradise is our Home Owners Association, specifically the HOA president, a woman named Karen Mitchell, who takes her position more seriously than most people take their actual careers. Karen is exactly what you would picture when you hear that name. She is in her mid-40s, always wearing athleisure wear despite never actually exercising, and she has that particular haircut that screams she wants to speak to the manager. Her SUV has so many bumper stickers about being a soccer mom that you can barely see the original paint color. She lives 4 houses down from me with her 2 kids, Brandon and Kaylee, who are actually pretty good kids despite their mother's best efforts to turn them into miniature tyrants. The problem started about 6 months ago when Arizona experienced a series of rolling blackouts due to the strain on the power grid. The summer heat was brutal that year, hitting 120 degrees for days on end, and everyone was running their air conditioning at maximum capacity. The power company could not keep up, so they started implementing planned outages to prevent the entire grid from collapsing. After sitting in my house sweating like a pig for 8 hours during the first blackout, I decided enough was enough. I went out and bought myself a proper backup generator, a nice Honda EU 7000 IS that cost me about $4,000. It was not cheap, but it could run my essential appliances, including my air conditioning, refrigerator, and my home office equipment since I work remotely as a software developer. I set up the generator in my backyard, properly installed with a transfer switch by a licensed electrician, everything up to code and legal. I even checked with the city to make sure I had all the necessary permits. I am not the kind of guy who cuts corners on this stuff, because I know that improper generator installation can be dangerous. The generator runs on gasoline, and I keep about 30 gallons stored in approved safety containers in my shed. I know that sounds like a lot, but during an outage, that generator burns through about half a gallon per hour when running the AC, so 30 gallons gives me roughly 60 hours of runtime, which is enough to get through most extended outages. Everything was fine for the first couple of months. We had a few more blackouts. My generator kept me comfortable while my neighbors suffered, and life went on. I even offered to let my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, run an extension cord over to keep her refrigerator running during outages, which she gratefully accepted. Then Karen noticed. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late July when she first came knocking on my door. I was in the middle of a video conference call with my team when I heard the aggressive pounding on my front door. I muted myself, apologized to my colleagues, and went to see who was trying to break down my door. Karen stood there in her typical pink yoga pants and white tank top, her blonde hair pulled back in a tight ponytail, and her face already red with anger despite me not even having spoken to her yet. "Trevor, we need to talk about your generator," she said, not even bothering with a greeting. "What about it?" I asked, genuinely confused because I had done everything by the book. "It is against HOA regulations to have a permanent generator installation without approval from the Architectural Review Committee," she said, crossing her arms over her chest. I had read our HOA covenants, conditions, and restrictions document cover to cover before I bought the generator, which is more than I can say for most people in our neighborhood. Actually, Karen, Section 12.4 of the CC in Articles explicitly allows backup generators as long as they meet city code requirements and are not visible from the street. Mine is in my backyard, fully enclosed and city approved. I have all the permits. Her face got redder. Well, I am calling an emergency board meeting to review this situation. The noise from your generator is disturbing the peace of the neighborhood. The generator has not run in 2 weeks because we have not had any power outages, I pointed out. And when it does run, it is only during outages when everyone else is dealing with the heat anyway. The Honda EU 7000 IS is specifically designed to be quiet. It runs at about 60 decibels, which is about as loud as normal conversation. I will be reviewing this matter, she said curtly and turned on her heel to leave. I went back to my video call and thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. Over the next few weeks, Karen started a campaign against me and my generator. She sent out emails to the entire HOA mailing list complaining about the noise, the safety hazard of storing fuel, and the unfairness of me having power when everyone else suffered during outages. She conveniently left out the part where anyone else in the neighborhood could also buy a generator if they wanted to. I responded to her emails with facts, photos of my proper installation, copies of my city permits, and the relevant sections of our HOA rules. Most of my neighbors sided with me, with several people even emailing me privately to ask about my generator setup because they were considering getting their own. This made Karen even more angry. The HOA board meeting she called was a joke. She tried to argue that my generator violated some vague aesthetic standard, but the other 2 board members, Tim Rodriguez and Susan Chen, both sided with me. Tim actually thanked me for bringing up the generator issue because he had been considering getting one himself. Karen was outvoted and the matter was settled. I thought that would be the end of it, but Karen does not accept defeat gracefully. A week after the board meeting, I got a notice from the HOA about my trash cans being visible from the street. They were not, but Karen had apparently driven by my house and claimed they were. I had to take time-stamped photos proving that my trash cans were stored in my side yard behind a gate. Then I got a notice about my yard having weeds. I have artificial turf and gravel landscaping. There were no weeds. I had to waste an entire morning documenting my yard with photos and measurements. Next was a complaint about my house number not being clearly visible. My house numbers are regulation size, properly mounted, and clearly visible from the street. I had to provide photos and cite the actual city ordinance about house numbers. Karen was harassing me with frivolous violations, and I knew it. I started documenting everything, keeping copies of all her bogus notices and my responses proving they were false. Then we had a major heat wave in mid-August. Temperatures hit 118 degrees for 5 days straight, and the power grid could not handle it. The power company announced rolling blackouts would be necessary, with each area potentially being without power for up to 12 hours. I made sure my generator was ready to go, checked the oil, tested the system, and filled up all my fuel containers. I had about 35 gallons of gas stored, which would get me through several days of outages if necessary. The blackout hit my neighborhood at 2 in the afternoon on a Thursday. The temperature outside was 116 degrees. Within minutes, my house started heating up as the air conditioning stopped. I went outside, fired up my generator, and within a few minutes, I had my AC running again. I checked on Mrs. Patterson next door, helped her get her extension cord set up, and made sure she was okay. She is 82 years old, and I worry about her in this heat. As I was heading back to my house, I saw Karen standing in her driveway, staring at my house. Her face was red, and I could not tell if it was from anger or from the heat. Her kids were visible through her front window and they looked miserable. I almost felt bad for them. Almost. But Karen had plenty of money to buy her own generator if she wanted to. She chose not to, and that was not my problem. The power stayed out for 10 hours that day. My generator ran perfectly, my house stayed cool, and I was able to continue working without interruption. Mrs. Patterson stayed comfortable, and I even offered to let another neighbor, a young couple with a newborn baby, bring some breast milk over to store in my fridge since theirs had gone warm. That night, after the power came back on, I shut down the generator and went to bed, exhausted from the heat and the long day. The next morning, I woke up to another scorching day and news that there would be another blackout starting at noon. I went out to my shed to check my fuel supply and prepare for another long day of running the generator. That is when I noticed something was wrong. I keep my fuel containers organized on a shelf in my shed, 5 6-gallon containers and 1 5-gallon container, all clearly labeled and properly sealed. When I had gone to bed last night, all 6 containers were full. Now 3 of them were empty, 15 gallons of gasoline gone. My first thought was that maybe I had miscounted or misremembered, but I am meticulous about this stuff. I keep a log of my fuel usage and inventory. According to my log, I should have had 35 gallons, and I had only used about 8 gallons during yesterday's outage. I should still have had 27 gallons. I only had 20 gallons. Someone had stolen 15 gallons of my gasoline. I immediately checked my shed for signs of forced entry, but the lock was intact and showed no signs of tampering. Then I remembered that I had not locked the shed last night. After the power came back on and I shut down the generator, I had been so tired that I had just closed the shed door without locking it. I was angry, but I tried to think logically about this. Who would steal gasoline from my shed? And more importantly, who even knew I had gasoline stored there? Then it hit me. The shed is not visible from the street. You can only see it if you are in my backyard. The only people who would know about my fuel storage would be my immediate neighbors or someone who had been snooping around my property. I thought about Karen standing in her driveway yesterday, watching my house run on generator power while hers sat dark and hot. I had no proof, but my gut told me exactly who had taken my fuel. I decided to set up a security camera before I did anything else. I went to Home Depot and bought a wireless outdoor security camera system, the kind that connects to your phone and records to the cloud. I spent the next 2 hours installing cameras covering my backyard, shed, and side yard. I had just finished installing the cameras when the power went out again at noon, right on schedule. I went to my shed, verified on my phone that the cameras were recording, and started up my generator with the remaining fuel I had. I spent the afternoon working and monitoring my security camera feed on my phone. Part of me hoped I was wrong about Karen, but another part of me wanted to catch her in the act if I was right. The power came back on around 8 that evening. I shut down the generator, made dinner, and stayed up late watching television. Around 11:30, I locked my shed with a padlock and went to bed. At 2:30 in the morning, my phone started buzzing with motion alerts from my security cameras. I grabbed my phone and pulled up the camera feed. The backyard camera showed a figure moving through my yard, and the shed camera clearly showed someone approaching the shed with a flashlight. It was Karen. I watched in disbelief as she tried the shed door and found it locked. She pulled something out of her pocket, and I realized it was a set of bolt cutters. She cut through my padlock like it was nothing and opened the shed door. The camera inside the shed captured everything. Karen entered with a large gas can. started transferring fuel from my containers into hers, and took about 10 gallons before she apparently decided that was enough. I had her dead to rights on camera, stealing my property, trespassing, and destroying my lock. I was furious, but I forced myself to think clearly. I could confront her right now, but that would just lead to a screaming match in the middle of the night. Better to handle this properly. I saved the video footage to multiple locations, sent copies to my email and to cloud storage, and then I called the non-emergency police line. The dispatcher asked me to describe what happened, and I explained that I had video footage of my neighbor stealing gasoline from my shed. She said she would send an officer over to take a report. Officer Martinez arrived about 20 minutes later. He was a professional guy in his 30s who took his job seriously. I showed him the video footage on my phone and his eyebrows went up. "That is pretty clear-cut theft and criminal trespassing," he said. "Plus property damage for the lock. Do you know this person?" "Unfortunately, yes. She is my HOA president and lives 4 houses down. We have had ongoing disputes about my generator," I explained. "And you are certain this happened tonight?" "The timestamp is right there on the video, and you can see she is wearing the same pink pajamas she had on earlier when I saw her putting her trash out." Officer Martinez took detailed notes, got copies of the video files, and took photos of my cut lock and the shed. "I am going to go talk to her right now. Do you want to press charges?" "Absolutely," I said without hesitation. "She has been harassing me for months and now she is stealing from me. I want this on record." He nodded and headed down the street to Karen's house. I watched from my driveway as he knocked on her door. It took a few minutes, but eventually Karen answered, looking disheveled and confused. I could not hear the conversation, but I could see her body language change from confused to defensive to angry as Officer Martinez spoke with her. The conversation lasted about 10 minutes before Officer Martinez came back to my house. She denied everything at first, but I told her we have video evidence. Then she claimed you gave her permission to take the fuel. I informed her that your video clearly shows her cutting your lock, which contradicts her story about having permission. "So what happens now?" I asked. "I have documented everything and taken your statement." I informed her that charges will be filed for theft, criminal trespassing, and criminal damage. She will receive a court summons, and you will likely need to testify. I also warned her to stay off your property. How did she react to that? Officer Martinez gave me a tired look. About as well as you would expect. She started yelling about HOA authority and how you are the one causing problems. I told her that HOA rules do not override criminal law. After Officer Martinez left, I went back to bed, but I could not sleep. I was still angry about the theft, and I was also worried about what Karen might do next. She had already shown she was willing to commit crimes to get back at me. What else might she do? The next morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls and 32 text messages. Most of them were from Karen's number, but there were also several from unknown numbers and a few from other HOA board members. Karen's messages started out angry, accusing me of harassment and claiming I had fabricated the video. Then they turned threatening, saying she would have me removed from the neighborhood and sue me for defamation. Finally, they became desperate, begging me to drop the charges and saying she would pay me back for the fuel. I did not respond to any of them. Instead, I forwarded all the messages to Officer Martinez as he had requested. The messages from the other board members, Tim Rodriguez and Susan Chen, were very different. They were both shocked and apologetic about Karen's behavior and wanted to know what they could do to help. I told them I appreciated their support and that I was handling it through the proper legal channels. Over the weekend, the neighborhood gossip mill went into overdrive. Apparently, Karen had been telling everyone her version of events, claiming that I had attacked her and that she was the victim. A few of her close friends believed her, but most people were skeptical, especially since everyone knew about her campaign against me and my generator. On Monday morning, I received a call from a Detective Sarah Williams with the Phoenix Police Department. She explained that she had been assigned to the case and wanted to meet with me to go over everything. We met at my house that afternoon, and I showed her all the security footage, my documentation of Karen's harassment campaign, and all the threatening messages she had sent me. Detective Williams was thorough, taking copies of everything and asking detailed questions about the timeline of events. "This is a pretty straightforward case," she said. "The video evidence is clear, and her messages to you after the fact are actually quite damaging to her defense. Threatening you and trying to get you to drop charges could potentially be considered witness intimidation. I just want this to stop," I told her. "I have tried to follow all the rules, handle everything properly, and she just keeps escalating. Well, the criminal charges should help with that. She is looking at misdemeanor theft, criminal trespassing, and criminal damage. Given the value of what was stolen and damaged, plus her behavior after the fact, I would not be surprised if the prosecutor wants to make an example of this case." Detective Williams left, and I tried to get back to my normal routine. The power grid had stabilized, so we were not having rolling blackouts anymore, which meant I did not need to run my generator. I replaced my padlock with a much heavier-duty one and added more security cameras around my property. 2 weeks later, Karen was formally charged with theft, criminal trespassing, and criminal damage. She was arrested, processed, and released on her own recognizance pending trial. I know this because she immediately sent me a long, rambling message blaming me for ruining her life and destroying her family. That message would come back to haunt her. What I did not know at the time was that Karen's husband, David Mitchell, had been documenting his own concerns about Karen's behavior for months. Apparently, her obsession with me and my generator was just the latest in a long pattern of erratic and aggressive behavior. David worked as an accountant for a large firm in downtown Phoenix, and he was frequently away on business. He had been growing increasingly concerned about Karen's ability to care for their 2 children, Brandon, who was 10, and Kaylee, who was 8. According to what I later learned from court documents that became public record, David had documentation of Karen leaving the kids alone for hours while she drove around the neighborhood looking for HOA violations to report. He had evidence of her spending ridiculous amounts of money on unnecessary things, while claiming they could not afford basic necessities for the kids. He had records of the kids missing school because Karen forgot to take them or was too busy with her HOA vendetta against various neighbors. The incident with stealing my fuel was apparently the final straw for David. He had already consulted with a divorce attorney and was planning to file for separation. When Karen got arrested, he moved up his timeline. The same week Karen was charged with the theft, David filed for divorce and requested emergency temporary custody of the children. He cited Karen's recent arrest, her pattern of erratic behavior, and his concerns about the children's safety and well-being. I found out about all of this because Karen came to my house at 9 o'clock on a Thursday night, banging on my door and screaming at me from my front porch. "You destroyed my family. You took my kids away from me. I hate you." I did not open the door. Instead, I called the police and recorded the incident on my phone through the window. Karen was still screaming on my porch when the police arrived 10 minutes later. The same officer Martinez, who had responded to the original theft, was one of the officers who showed up. "Madam, you need to calm down and step away from this residence," he said firmly. "He took my kids. He destroyed my marriage. This is all his fault," Karen screamed, pointing at my house. "Madam, you are trespassing on private property. I am going to need you to leave immediately, or you will be arrested. I am the HOA president. I have authority here." "Madam, that does not give you the right to harass residents or trespass on private property. You need to leave now." Karen finally seemed to realize that she was making things worse for herself. She stormed off my porch and headed back down the street toward her house, still yelling about how unfair everything was. Officer Martinez came to my door, and I let him in to give a statement about what had happened. "I am sorry you are dealing with this," he said. "Unfortunately, people sometimes fixate on someone they blame for their problems, even when the real issues are their own behavior." "Is there anything I can do to keep her away from me?" I asked. "You could file for an order of protection, especially given the theft, the threats, and now this incident. That would legally prohibit her from coming near you or contacting you." I took his advice and filed for an order of protection the next day. Given the video evidence of the theft, her threatening messages, and the incident of her screaming on my porch, the judge granted a temporary order immediately and scheduled a hearing for a permanent order. The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later, and in the meantime, Karen was legally required to stay at least 100 yards away from me and my property. This meant she could not attend HOA board meetings because they were held at the community clubhouse, which was only about 50 feet from my house. Tim Rodriguez and Susan Chen called an emergency board meeting without Karen to discuss the situation. They asked me to attend, and I agreed. The meeting was awkward but necessary. "Trevor, we want to apologize for everything you have been through," Susan said. "Karen's behavior has been completely unacceptable, and we should have stepped in sooner." "We are calling for a vote to remove Karen from the board," Tim added. "Given the criminal charges, the order of protection, and her inability to perform her duties, we think it is necessary." I appreciated their support, but I also knew this was going to make Karen even more angry. Still, it was not my decision to make. The board voted unanimously to remove Karen as president and as a board member. Susan was elected as the new president. The next few weeks were relatively quiet. Karen stayed away from me, though I heard through the neighborhood gossip that she was telling anyone who would listen that I had conspired with her husband to steal her children and destroy her life. The reality, which came out in court documents, was much different. David had documented years of concerning behavior, and the theft incident was simply the catalyst that forced him to act. The court appointed a guardian ad litem to represent the children's interests, and after interviewing both parents and the children, the guardian recommended that David be granted primary custody, with Karen getting supervised visitation. The custody hearing was scheduled for early October, and the hearing for the permanent order of protection was scheduled for late September. I was subpoenaed to testify at both hearings since Karen's theft and subsequent harassment were part of the evidence in both cases. The order of protection hearing came first. I showed up at the courthouse on a Wednesday morning, dressed in a suit and carrying a folder with all my documentation. Karen was there with her attorney, a tired-looking woman who seemed like she knew this was not a winning case. David was also there, sitting on the opposite side of the courtroom, and I gave him a polite nod. When it was my turn to testify, I walked through the entire timeline of events, from Karen's initial complaints about my generator to the theft to her showing up at my house screaming. I presented the video evidence, the threatening messages, and Officer Martinez's reports. Karen's attorney tried to argue that I had provoked Karen by refusing to remove my generator and that her behavior was just a reaction to my stubbornness. The judge was not buying it. Counselor, even if we accept your argument that Mr. Dawson was being difficult about the generator, which the evidence does not support since he had all the proper permits and approvals, that does not justify theft, trespassing, property damage, or harassment, the judge said firmly. The judge granted the permanent order of protection for 1 year. Karen was ordered to stay at least 100 yards away from me and was prohibited from any direct or indirect contact. As we left the courtroom, I could see Karen crying and arguing with her attorney. I felt a small twinge of sympathy because this whole situation had spiraled so far out of control. But then, I remembered her cutting my lock and stealing my fuel in the middle of the night. She had made her choices, and now she was facing the consequences. The custody hearing was 2 weeks later, and it was much more intense. I was called as a witness to describe the theft incident and Karen's behavior during our HOA disputes. David testified about Karen's pattern of obsessive behavior, her neglect of the children's needs, and specific incidents where she had left the kids alone or forgotten to pick them up from school because she was too focused on HOA matters. The guardian ad litem testified that both children expressed fear of their mother's angry outbursts and preferred to live with their father. Brandon, the 10-year-old, had told the guardian that he was scared when his mom got mad because she would yell and throw things. Kaylee, the 8-year-old, had said she was afraid her mom would forget to pick her up from school again. Karen's attorney tried to paint David as an absent father who was never home. But David had evidence of his work schedule, documentation of taking the kids to their activities on his days off, and testimony from the children's teachers that he was actively involved in their education. The most damaging testimony came from Karen's own mother, who reluctantly admitted that she had concerns about Karen's mental health and had urged her to seek counseling for her anger issues. The judge took a week to issue a ruling. David was granted primary physical custody of both children. Karen was granted supervised visitation every other weekend and 1 evening per week. The judge ordered Karen to complete anger management counseling and parenting classes before her visitation could be reconsidered for unsupervised status. The order stated clearly that the court's primary concern was the safety and well-being of the children, and that Karen's recent criminal charges, the order of protection, and the pattern of behavior described by multiple witnesses raised serious concerns about her judgment and ability to provide a stable environment. I read about the ruling in the court documents that became public record. I felt bad for Brandon and Kaylee because divorce is hard on kids, but I also felt like the judge had made the right decision based on the evidence. The criminal trial for the theft charges was scheduled for November. Karen's attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the prosecutor was not particularly generous. Karen was looking at probation, restitution, community service, and a permanent criminal record. In the end, Karen accepted a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to theft and criminal trespassing. The criminal damage charge was dropped as part of the deal. She was sentenced to 1 year of probation, 100 hours of community service, ordered to pay me restitution for the stolen fuel and damaged lock, and required to complete an anger management program. The judge made a point of stating that theft is theft, regardless of who commits it or what their reasons might be, and that being an HOA president does not place someone above the law. After the sentencing, I finally felt like I could breathe again. The whole ordeal had taken nearly 4 months from the night of the theft to the final criminal sentencing, and it had been exhausting. Karen moved out of the neighborhood shortly after losing custody of her kids. David stayed in the house with Brandon and Kaylee, and from what I could see, the kids seemed happier and more relaxed. I would see them playing outside, riding bikes, being normal kids, instead of being inside a house filled with tension. David approached me one afternoon while I was getting my mail. "Trevor, I want to apologize for everything you went through because of Karen," he said, looking genuinely remorseful. "You do not need to apologize for her actions," I told him. "You were not the one who stole from me or harassed me." "I know, but I should have done something sooner. I knew she was becoming obsessive about HOA stuff, and I knew she had fixated on you and your generator. I should have intervened before it got to this point. You were in a difficult position. Nobody wants to believe their spouse is capable of something like this. The kids ask about you sometimes," he said. "Brandon thinks your generator is cool, and Kaylee wants to thank you for helping Mrs. Patterson during the blackouts. Would it be okay if they came by sometime? I completely understand if you would rather not have anything to do with our family after everything that happened." I thought about it for a moment. Those kids had been through enough, and they had not done anything wrong. Sure, they can come by. Maybe I can show Brandon how the generator works. He is old enough to understand the safety aspects. David smiled, looking relieved. "Thank you. That means a lot." A few days later, David brought Brandon and Kaylee over on a Saturday afternoon. The kids were shy at first, but they warmed up when I brought out some lemonade and cookies. Brandon was fascinated by the generator and asked a million questions about how it worked, what it could power, and how much fuel it used. I spent an hour explaining the basics of generators, electrical systems, and safety procedures. He soaked it all up like a sponge. Kaylee was more interested in my cat, Mr. Whiskers, who usually hides when strangers come over but apparently decided she was acceptable. She sat on my patio playing with the cat while Brandon and I talked about generators and electrical systems. Before they left, Kaylee gave me a shy hug and thanked me for being nice to them. Brandon shook my hand very seriously and thanked me for teaching him about generators. After they left, I felt something I had not felt in months, which was simple satisfaction with my life in this neighborhood. For all the drama and stress Karen had caused, there were still good people here. Mrs. Patterson next door, Tim and Susan on the HOA board, David and his kids, and plenty of other neighbors who had been supportive throughout the ordeal. The HOA elected a new board member to replace Karen, a retired engineer named Robert Chen, who was Susan's husband. He was a no-nonsense guy who believed in following the rules as written and not making up new ones to harass people. The HOA meetings became boring again, which was exactly how they should be. Life settled into a comfortable routine. We had a few more power outages during an October heat wave, and my generator performed perfectly. This time, though, I made sure to keep my shed locked at all times, and my security cameras were always recording. I even helped Tim Rodriguez set up his own generator system after he bought one based on my recommendation. I showed him how to properly install the transfer switch, explained the safety requirements, and helped him source fuel containers. He was grateful for the help, and it was nice to have another neighbor with backup power, Mrs. Patterson baked me cookies every few weeks to thank me for helping her during outages. She insisted that I was a godsend, and that she did not know what she would have done without me during those hot days without power. The restitution check from Karen arrived in late November, exactly the amount the court had ordered for the stolen fuel and the damaged lock. There was no note, no apology, just a check. I deposited it and considered the matter financially settled, even though I knew I would never get back the time and energy I had spent dealing with her harassment. I heard through the neighborhood gossip that Karen was living with her mother in Scottsdale and working part-time at a retail store. She was apparently complying with her probation requirements and seeing her kids during supervised visitations. I hoped, for her kids' sake, that she was getting the help she needed and working on her issues. December brought cooler weather, which meant no more worries about power outages for a while. I started preparing for the holidays, putting up lights and decorating my house. Brandon and Kaylee came over with David to see my decorations, and the kids were impressed by my synchronized light display. "How did you program all those lights?" Brandon asked, staring in awe at the display. "Computer program called Lightorama," I explained. "You design the sequences on your computer and sync them to music." "That is so cool. Can you teach me how to do that?" I looked at David, who nodded gratefully. "Sure, buddy. Maybe we can work on a small project together for next year." Brandon was thrilled, and we spent the next few weekends working on basic programming concepts using some simple LED strips and a small controller I had lying around. He was a smart kid, and he picked up the concepts quickly. Kaylee was less interested in the technical aspects, but loved helping choose colors and music. She had strong opinions about which songs should go with which light patterns, and honestly, her suggestions were pretty good. Working with the kids became a regular thing. David would bring them over on Saturday afternoons, and we would work on various projects. Brandon was learning about electronics and programming, while Kaylee was developing an interest in art and design. I was not trying to replace their mother, but I think I was providing some stability and positive mentorship during a difficult time in their lives. The holidays came and went without incident. I spent Christmas with my sister and her family in Flagstaff, enjoying the snow and cooler temperatures. When I came back to Phoenix, I felt refreshed and ready to start the new year. January brought the HOA annual meeting, which was remarkably drama-free compared to the previous year. Susan Chen gave a report on the association's finances. Tim Rodriguez discussed upcoming maintenance projects, and Robert Chen presented proposed updates to the community landscaping. There were no accusations, no fights, no drama. It was boring and perfect. At the end of the meeting, Susan publicly thanked me for my patience and professionalism during the previous year's difficulties. Several other neighbors applauded, which was both embarrassing and gratifying. After the meeting, several neighbors approached me to apologize for not speaking up sooner when Karen was harassing me. They explained that they had not realized how bad it was and felt guilty for not supporting me more actively. I appreciated their apologies, but I also understood that most people avoid conflict when they can. It is human nature. What mattered was that when it really counted, when the evidence was clear and the behavior was obviously wrong, the community had supported me. February brought an unexpected development. I received a letter from Karen's attorney with a formal written apology from Karen. The letter acknowledged that her behavior had been inappropriate, that she took full responsibility for her actions, and that she was working with a therapist to address her issues with anger and obsessive behavior. The letter explained that she was writing not because she had to, but because her therapist had encouraged her to make amends to the people she had harmed as part of her treatment. She apologized for the theft, the harassment, the false accusations, and the stress she had caused me. She acknowledged that her behavior had been driven by jealousy and a need to control things around her, and she was working to understand and change those patterns. The letter stated clearly that she was not asking for anything from me, not forgiveness, not for me to drop the order of protection, not for any kind of response. She just wanted me to know that she understood what she had done wrong and that she was sorry. I read the letter several times. It seemed genuine, and I knew from my own research into anger management and behavioral therapy that making amends was a legitimate part of the recovery process. Still, I was skeptical. Words are easy. Changed behavior over time is what really matters. I did not respond to the letter, but I did keep it. Maybe someday I would feel ready to accept her apology, but right now, I was content with the peace and quiet I had finally achieved. Life continued in its pleasant, boring routine. The HOA functioned properly. My generator stood ready for the next power outage. My security cameras kept watch over my property, and I continued to mentor Brandon and Kaylee in various projects. In March, David told me that Karen's supervised visitations had been going well, and that she seemed to be genuinely working on her issues. The kids reported that she was calmer, more attentive, and actually listened to them instead of just talking at them about her problems. Her therapist said it might be possible to move to unsupervised visitation by summer if she continues making progress, David said. I think that would be good for the kids. They need their mom, just a healthier version of her. I agreed. Children need both parents when possible, and it sounded like Karen was finally getting the help she needed. In April, the order of protection was set to expire. I had the option to request an extension, but I decided not to. Karen had not violated the order. She seemed to be working on her issues, and I did not want to keep the legal restriction in place if it was no longer necessary. The order expired quietly, and nothing changed. Karen did not contact me, did not drive by my house, did not cause any problems. She was apparently focused on her therapy, her part-time job, and earning back time with her kids. Summer arrived with the usual brutal heat. The power grid was more stable this year thanks to some infrastructure improvements, but we still had occasional outages. My generator performed flawlessly, and I was prepared. In June, I saw Karen for the first time in months. She was at Brandon's Little League game, sitting in the stands with David and Kaylee. It was apparently her first unsupervised visit, and she was being appropriate and focused on her kids. Our eyes met briefly across the field, and she gave a small, tentative nod. I nodded back. We were not friends, and we probably never would be, but at least we could be civil for the sake of her kids. Brandon hit a home run that game, and both his parents cheered loudly. Kaylee jumped up and down with excitement. It was a good moment for their family, and I was glad to see it. As the summer progressed, I saw Karen occasionally at community events, always with her kids and always behaving appropriately. She never approached me, never tried to engage in conversation, just gave a polite nod when our paths crossed and moved on. The neighborhood gossip reported that she had moved into her own apartment in Phoenix and had a better job working as an office manager for a dental practice. She apparently had a regular schedule that allowed her to have the kids more often, and by all accounts, she was being a good mom. In August, almost exactly 1 year after the theft, I received another letter from Karen. This one was much shorter. Trevor, I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but I wanted to let you know that my probation ended last month, and I have completed all my court requirements. I am continuing with therapy because it has helped me understand and change behaviors that were hurting me and everyone around me. I will never be able to fully make up for what I did to you, but I want you to know that I have learned from it and I am a different person now. I hope you are doing well. Karen. This letter felt different from the first one. It was simpler, more direct, and felt more genuine. She was not asking for anything, not trying to justify or explain, just updating me and wishing me well. I thought about responding but decided not to. Sometimes the best response is no response. We were not friends and we did not need to have a relationship. as long as she continued to respect boundaries and focus on being a good mother to her kids. That was enough. Life in Sagebrush Estates continued peacefully. The HOA board functioned well under Susan's leadership. The community was well maintained, and the drama of the previous year faded into neighborhood legend. I continued to mentor Brandon and Kaylee, teaching them various skills and helping with school projects. Brandon had developed a real passion for engineering and programming, and I was happy to encourage that interest. Kaylee discovered a talent for graphic design and was always showing me her latest creations. Mrs. Patterson remained my favorite neighbor, always ready with cookies and stories about the old days in Phoenix when the city was much smaller, and the summers did not seem quite as hot. Tim Rodriguez and I became good friends, bonding over our generators and our shared belief that HOA rules should be reasonable and actually enforced fairly. His generator had saved him during several outages, and he was grateful I had helped him set it up properly. As September arrived and the weather finally started to cool down, I reflected on the events of the past year. It had been stressful, frustrating, and at times frightening to deal with Karen's harassment and theft. But it had also shown me that the legal system works when you document everything and follow proper procedures. It had shown me that most people are fundamentally decent and will support you when you are in the right. Most importantly, it had taught me that sometimes people can change if they get the help they need and take responsibility for their actions. Karen had made terrible choices, faced real consequences, and apparently was working to become a better person. Her kids were thriving with more stability in their lives. David had found peace and was being an excellent father, and me. I was content. I had my house, my generator that had started this whole mess, but had proven its worth many times over, my cat Mr. Whiskers, good neighbors, and a quiet life in suburban Phoenix. On a Saturday afternoon in late September, I was in my driveway washing my car when Brandon and Kaylee came running up the street. Trevor, guess what?" Brandon shouted excitedly. "What is going on?" I asked, turning off the hose. "Dad said we can have a sleepover at Mom's apartment tonight without a supervisor," Kaylee said, bouncing with excitement. "That is great. I am really happy for you guys. And Mom said she is sorry for all the trouble she caused last year, and she is glad that you are teaching me about electronics and programming," Brandon added. "She said it was really nice of you to help us even after what she did." I was surprised but pleased. "Well, you guys are great kids and I enjoy working with you. I am glad your mom is doing better." "She is," Kaylee said enthusiastically. "She does not yell anymore and she listens to us, and she makes really good pancakes now." The kids ran off to continue preparing for their sleepover, and I went back to washing my car with a smile on my face. David stopped by later that afternoon to thank me again for being there for his kids during the difficult time. "You did not have to do any of this," he said. "After everything Karen put you through, you could have just avoided our whole family, but you did not, and it has meant the world to Brandon and Kaylee." "They are good kids," I said simply, "and they did not do anything wrong. They should not have to pay for their mother's mistakes." "Well, I appreciate it, and for what it is worth, I think Karen genuinely has changed. She is not the same person who stole your fuel last year. Therapy and consequences have made a real difference." "I am glad to hear that. Everyone deserves a chance to improve themselves if they are willing to put in the work." As David left, I realized that this whole situation had come full circle. What started with anger, theft, and legal consequences had somehow ended with healing, growth, and unexpected friendships. My generator, the innocent piece of equipment that had sparked Karen's obsession and led to her downfall, sat quietly in my backyard, ready to serve its purpose whenever the power went out. It was just a machine, but it had become a symbol of the importance of preparation, following rules, and standing up for yourself when someone tries to bully you. The security cameras I had installed continued to watch over my property, a reminder that documentation and evidence matter when dealing with conflicts. The shed where Karen had stolen my fuel now had a heavy-duty lock and motion sensing lights, practical improvements that came from a difficult experience. As October arrived and the Phoenix heat finally broke, giving way to the beautiful mild weather that makes people understand why anyone lives in this desert, I felt genuinely happy with my life. The ordeal with Karen had been difficult, but I had handled it correctly by documenting everything, following proper legal procedures, and not letting anger drive my decisions. The neighborhood had returned to its peaceful state, the HOA was functioning properly, and the drama of the previous year had faded into the past. On Halloween, I handed out candy to neighborhood kids, including Brandon and Kaylee, who were dressed as a mad scientist and an artist, respectively. Their costumes were perfect representations of who they were becoming, and I was proud to have played a small role in encouraging their interests. Karen dropped them off at David's house later that evening, and I saw her give her ex-husband a friendly hug before she left. They had managed to develop a functional co-parenting relationship, which was the best possible outcome for their kids. As November arrived, I started thinking about the holidays again and planning my light display. Brandon had already asked if he could help design some of the sequences this year, and I had agreed. It would be a fun project to work on together. The 1-year anniversary of the theft came and went without incident. I marked it privately, acknowledging how far everyone had come in that year. Karen had gone from being arrested for stealing my fuel to completing her probation, getting her life together, and rebuilding her relationship with her kids. David had gone from a difficult divorce and custody battle to successfully co-parenting and raising 2 happy children. Brandon and Kaylee had gone from living in a stressful home environment to thriving with stability and support. And I had gone from being harassed and victimized to successfully defending myself through proper legal channels, and ultimately finding peace and satisfaction in my community. The HOA held its annual holiday party in December, and for the first time in years, the event was drama-free and actually fun. Susan and her husband Robert had organized games, food, and a white elephant gift exchange. Neighbors mingled, kids played, and everyone enjoyed the mild December evening. I brought Mrs. Patterson as my guest since she did not like to drive at night anymore. She charmed everyone with her stories and her homemade cookies, which disappeared within minutes of being put out on the dessert table. As I looked around at my neighbors, laughing and enjoying themselves, I felt grateful for this community, despite all the challenges it had presented. Life in an HOA neighborhood had its frustrations and complications, but it also provided structure, maintenance, and a sense of community when things worked correctly. The new year arrived with hope and possibility. I had plans to upgrade my generator system, add more solar panels to my house, and continue mentoring Brandon and Kaylee in their various projects. Life was good. In January, I ran into Karen at the grocery store. It was the first time we had been in close proximity since before the order of protection had been issued. She was in one aisle, I turned into the same aisle, and we both froze for a moment. "Hello, Trevor," she said quietly. "Hello, Karen." There was an awkward pause, and then she spoke again. "I know I have said it before, but I really am sorry for everything I put you through. It was wrong, and I had no excuse." I studied her face. She looked different than she had during her HOA president days, less stressed, less angry, more at peace. I appreciate that. It sounds like you are doing better. I am. Therapy helped me realize I was using HOA stuff as a way to feel in control when everything else in my life was falling apart. That does not excuse what I did, but at least I understand it now. And how are things with your kids? Her face lit up. Really good. Brandon talks about you all the time, about all the things you are teaching him. Thank you for that. You did not have to help them, but you did, and it has meant everything. They are good kids. I enjoy working with them. Well, thank you. And I will let you get back to your shopping. Take care, Trevor. You too, Karen. She walked away, and I continued my shopping, feeling like a weight I had not realized I was still carrying had finally lifted. That brief conversation had provided closure in a way that letters could not. Life continued its comfortable pattern through the winter and into spring. The HOA board continued to function well. My house was in good shape. My generator stood ready, and I remained actively involved in the community. In March, Brandon won first place at his school science fair with a project about renewable energy systems that I had helped him develop. He was so proud of his trophy, and I was proud of him for all the work he had put into the project. In April, Kaylee's artwork was selected to be displayed at a local gallery's youth art show. She had created a series of digital designs combining her love of bright colors and geometric patterns, and they were genuinely impressive for an 8-year-old. David threw a celebration dinner for the kids' achievements, and he invited me to join them. It was a nice evening, filled with laughter and pride in what the kids had accomplished. Karen was there too, and while things were not exactly comfortable between us, we were able to be civil and focus on celebrating the children. As summer approached and the heat returned to Phoenix, I felt settled and content. The drama and stress of 2 years ago had been transformed into something positive. I had stood up for myself, followed proper procedures, and ultimately, everyone involved had come out better for it. My generator would continue to keep me cool during power outages. My security cameras would continue to watch over my property. And life in Sagebrush Estates would continue with all its quirks and complications. Sometimes the worst situations lead to unexpected growth and positive change. Karen had faced consequences for her actions, gotten help for her issues, and become a better person and mother. Her kids had gained stability and mentorship. I had gained confidence in standing up for myself, and the satisfaction of knowing I had handled a difficult situation correctly. And somewhere in all of that, a neighborhood had learned that HOA rules are important, but they do not override basic respect, fairness, and the law. It was a lesson that apparently needed to be learned the hard way, but at least it had been learned. As I sat on my patio on a warm May evening, listening to my generator hum quietly during a minor power outage, I reflected on the journey from that hot August night when Karen had cut my lock and stolen my fuel to now, 2 years later, when everyone involved had found peace and moved forward with their lives. It had been quite a ride, but I would not change any of it. Well, maybe I would have preferred to keep my 15 gallons of gas and not need security cameras, but the personal growth and unexpected friendships that came from the situation were worth the temporary trouble. Life in an HOA neighborhood is never boring, but at least now it was boring in all the right ways, with properly maintained common areas, reasonable enforcement of sensible rules, and neighbors who mostly got along. And when the power went out, I had my generator, my fuel stored securely in my locked shed, and the peace of mind that comes from being prepared. That is really all anyone can ask for.